The movie begins with the story of two kids, Renee and Marcus, who attend canoe camp together. Both come from different backgrounds and experiences, and their differences initially keep them from connecting. But when circumstances force them to work together, they find a new way of understanding each other and begin to see the world through each other's eyes. A nonverbal autistic girl named Renee is enrolled in a canoeing camp. She usually travels with a camp counselor, but for this clip, she is teamed with Marcus. Renee enjoys having her phone close by so she can communicate and listen to her favorite ringtone. A teenage boy named Marcus is in canoe camp. He is assigned to go with Renee, a non-verbal autistic girl, one day after being tardy for class. He is initially unable to converse with Renee. Marcus doesn't immediately strike a chord with her, and she shows no interest in his attempts to demonstrate various rowing tactics. She flashes him a poop emoji and gestures toward the facilities when he asks her what she wants to do. Renee reaches out to run her hands through the reeds as they get close to the bathrooms. Marcus comes to the conclusion that she wasn't in need of the restroom and instead wanted to touch the reeds. Marcus tries touching the reeds as well, starting to understand her better as they exchange words back and forth a few times. She returns to playing the ringtone on her phone after that. After having an idea, Marcus decides to take Renee to a tunnel where the ringtone she's constantly using will reverberate. It initially appeals to her. Renee is overpowered by the sound of a speedboat going by, but it also intensifies that noise. She grips the paddle in fear and makes an effort to direct them away from the noise. Marcus fights to seize control of the canoe so he can get them to safety because he fears she will lead them into the path of the speedboat. They hit the ground hard. Renee loses her cool. She screams and throws her phone, which splashes into the water. She hides beneath the canoe while sobbing and won't come out. Marcus waits, getting impatient but eventually calming down. She joyfully clings to the reed he chooses and hands it to her. Renee eventually exits, and together with Marcus, they mimic the sound of her ringtone. They return to camp after getting the canoe back in the water. Renee receives a text from Marcus in the post-credits sequence asking if she'd like to go canoeing once again. She wants to hear her ringtone reverberate against the walls, so Marcus offers to take her into a tunnel. She first enjoys it. However, the tunnel intensifies the deafening noise as a speedboat zooms through. In an effort to get away, Renee panics and grabs the paddle. Marcus tries to maneuver them away from the speedboat out of concern that they might collide. They land on the sand. Marcus tries to guide them away from the speedboat out of fear of hitting it. They stumble onto the sand. The tunnel was long and dark, and Marcus and Renee had been walking for what seemed like hours. Marcus was getting worried that they had taken a wrong turn somewhere, and that they were wandering deeper and deeper into the tunnel, with no hope of finding their way back out. Suddenly, Marcus heard a strange sound coming from the other end of the tunnel. He stopped and listened closely, but the sound faded away. He looked around and realized that Renee was no longer with him. He had lost her somewhere in the darkness. Renee had reached the end of the tunnel, but she felt no sense of accomplishment. She had endured the darkness, the dampness, and the cramped walls, but the journey had been a fruitless one. She had emerged from the depths with no answers or solutions, only an emptiness that she couldn't shake. Standing there, in the light of day, she realized that the darkness had stayed with her. It was a reminder that she was still standing, even if the answers she had sought remained elusive. She was no longer confined by the narrow walls that had surrounded her, but the darkness within still remained. Renee had been fighting back tears all day, but now they were flowing freely. She had felt so alone and scared, so when she saw the canoe she decided to hide beneath it. The tears just kept coming, and Renee felt like she had nowhere else to turn. She curled up under the canoe and cried until she had no more tears left, feeling a little bit safer in her makeshift shelter. After a few moments of peace, she finally began to get her bearings and realized that she now had an option. She could either stay in this spot until someone found her, or she could muster the courage to face whatever was waiting for her. With a deep breath, Renee wiped away her tears and decided to make her way back to the outside world. Marcus cautiously entered the dark tunnel, his heart pounding. He had been searching for Renee for hours, and now he was finally close. As he kept walking, he became more and more desperate to find Renee. He checked every nook and cranny of the tunnel, but he could not find her. He was starting to think that he might never find her again when suddenly he heard her voice in the darkness. He could hear the faint sound of sobbing coming from farther down the tunnel. He followed the sound until he saw her, huddled in a corner, her head bowed and her shoulders shaking. "Renee," he called softly, swallowing the lump in his throat. He rushed over and knelt beside her. Her tear-stained face looked up at him with a mix of relief and fear. "Marcus, what are you doing here?" she said, her voice trembling. "I came to find you," he said, taking her hands in his. He tells her that he was so worried when she did not come back. Renee nodded, her eyes still shining with tears. She says sorry with a small voice. "I just needed some time alone." Marcus nodded, understanding. He gently pulled her into a hug. He tells her that she is safe with him. Renee didn't say anything, but she clung to him as she cried. Marcus held her until she had cried herself out, and then he gently pulled away and wiped her tears away. "Come on," he said softly. "Let's get you home." Renee nodded, and they slowly made their way out of the tunnel and back into the light. He had never been so relieved in his life. He ran to her and hugged her tightly. The two of them embraced in the darkness, both grateful to have found each other once again. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness. It was a woman dressed in a long, hooded robe. She seemed to be guiding them and speaking in a language neither of them understood. After a few moments of hesitation, Marcus and Renee followed her, and the woman led them deeper into the darkness. The two of them eventually reached a dimly lit chamber. There were strange symbols and runes carved into the walls, and the air seemed charged with energy. Marcus and Renee were too afraid to speak as the woman continued to guide them through the chamber. After what seemed like hours, the woman eventually stopped and turned to them. She smiled, revealing sharp teeth, and spoke in a voice both calming and authoritative. She told them that they had been lost in the tunnels for days and that she was the one who had been watching them. She said that she was the guardian of the tunnels and that she had guided them out of the darkness and into the light. Marcus and Renee thanked the woman before making their way out of the tunnels. As they emerged back into the city, they breathed a sigh of relief. They had been lost in the darkness, but thanks to the guardian of the tunnels, they had emerged back into the light. Renee and Marcus emerged from the long, dark tunnel, blinking against the sudden onslaught of light. They were both breathless from the adventure, but there was a sparkle in their eyes that couldn't be denied. Renee exclaimed, "That was amazing. I can't believe we actually made it out of there." Marcus smiled and said, "I knew you were up for the challenge. You didn't doubt for a second that we could do it." Renee laughed, a light, joyous sound that echoed through the tunnel behind them. "We did it. We made it out here together." She glanced up into the sky and smiled, her eyes twinkling with satisfaction. "Now our adventure really begins." Renee had come to terms with the fact that she may never find the answers she was looking for, and that was okay. She had survived the journey, and that was enough. No matter what happened in the future, she had come out of the darkness stronger and more resilient. That was enough for her. The next morning, Renee slowly opened her eyes as the morning sun slowly made its way through her bedroom window. She had had a busy night and was now feeling exhausted. She knew she had to start her day, so she slowly got out of bed and made her way to the bathroom. As she stepped in the shower, she let the hot water run down her body and wash away her worries. She felt relaxed and refreshed. When she was finished, she made her way into the kitchen and started her breakfast. As she ate, she thought about her day and all the things she had to do. She was eager to get to work, but at the same time, she was afraid of the unknown. She finished her breakfast and decided to take the day one step at a time. She grabbed her bag and keys and made her way out of her apartment. As she walked down the street, she noticed the birds chirping in the trees and the morning mist that hung over the city. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that no matter what happened, she could handle it. Renee smiled as she walked into her office. She was ready for the day. Marcus had made it to the top of the mountain, stood on the precipice, and looked out over the valley below. The sun was just beginning to set, casting an orange glow across the landscape. Marcus knew he had accomplished something great, and a feeling of pride and accomplishment washed over him. He had made it. With a smile, Marcus turned away from the valley and began his descent. He had a long journey ahead of him, but he was ready and eager to start the next leg of his journey. Marcus and Renee met again, and then the sun was setting, painting the sky a blazing orange that no artist could ever replicate. The park was nearly empty now, save for one young couple who walked together along the path. Renee and Marcus had spent the day together, enjoying each other's company and learning more about each other. As they walked, they stopped a few times to look at the view, marveling at how beautiful the world was. Eventually, they reached the end of the path and Renee and Marcus stopped, looking at each other. At that moment, they knew that their relationship was something special. They embraced, feeling the warmth of the sun and the love in their hearts. They stayed there for a while, enjoying the moment until the sun had set and it was time to go home. As they walked away, they both knew that they had found something that would last forever.